Serving up opinions on a silver platter, it's a grind. The information getting, bringing your got so hot you'll be sweating. These two dudes with attitudes will put you in the mood for a plate full of brain food. So don't delay, my daughter, my son. Visit the buffet called Promoter 101.
All right, bring it in, team. Take a knee. I like what I'm seeing out there. Got strong hustle across the board. Now I need you to lock in, listen up, because Coach Steiny and Luke have the game plan.
Coach Steiny, that's a scary thought here. The hustle this season has been outstanding, and it's not changing this episode, as we have Killian & Company's founder, Joe Killian, taking us down a path of sponsorship and industry history that is simply next level.
But we'll catch up with the University of Chicago student, Anna Lilly, who is seeking a summer music internship in the industry, and she might be exactly what your office is looking for. And what great hustle to reach out to us and use our platform to try and figure out how to get into the industry this summer.
The Promoter 101 podcast starts right now.
Proof that you can be half asleep and still mildly entertaining. It's Steiny and Luke in the morning on Promoter 101.
Hey, we've got a bunch of old Promoter 101s just waiting for you. Go back and check out all of them. Doesn't matter if you want to check out Bob Rue, Rapino, Jay Marciano. We've got them all. Promoter101.com and have your pick of them.
Feel free to hit us up with your questions and ideas at steiny@promoter101.net.
Stay in touch. Come join the conversation online on X. The show is Promoter 101. Dan is at The Jew. I'm at W. Luke Pierce. Over on the gram, the show is at Steiny Promoter 101. Dan is at Dan Presents, and I'm at W. Luke Pierce.
Wake up with Steiny and Luke. And then you should probably question all your life choices. Yeah. Promoter 101.
Luke, should we get into the news of the week? What the industry's in and outs are? There's so much going on.
Dan, I think the biggest story this month, not a tour, it's Live Nation versus United States, something we've been covering for a long time here. Glad to maybe finally have an end to it, although I think a lot of people wish there wasn't. After some months of pressure, Live Nation reached a tentative deal that pauses its federal antitrust trial. Don't confuse that entirely for a win. On the table was a forced divestiture of a dozen amphitheaters, some Ticketmaster fee caps, shorter exclusivity deals for venues, open ticketing provisions. That was all on the table during this discussion. And instead, Live Nation gets out here with no federal fine, but a $280 million fund to settle state-level claims. Reports suggest that Donald Trump personally pushed for a settlement, including a White House meeting with CEO Michael Rapino just days before the deal was announced. Was it a legal resolution or political choreography? There's been plenty of that going on. We can name, everything from Twitter to CBS happening in the White House. But I think there's been some responses from some other trade organizations like the National Independent Venue Association, our friends at NEVA, which called the deal a failure of the justice system, pointing out that $280 million is just 4 days of Live Nation revenue, which is kind of crazy. There's some reputational hits that come with this, of course, too. The newly unsealed internal messages, which I think people have been having a field day with, Dan. Some internal messages showed employees mocking fans, openly bragging about fees, basically confirming what a lot of people had suspected. It's not done there because states are stepping in. Attorney generals across the country are pursuing their own enforcement, treating the federal deal as a floor, not a ceiling. That means more localized rules, some shorter contracts, potentially real cracks in the Live Nation system. Live Nation's certainly going to survive this thing, but it seems like the ground underneath them could still be shifting a little bit. For managers, promoters, artists, I don't think the opportunity is done here. I think it's not in the settlement, but maybe this is an opportunity for more leverage in negotiations, maybe some more flexibility in ticketing partners, and maybe just more public support for fan-friendly prices, Dan. So while I like to say this story, certainly of this particular case isn't over, and just maybe entering a new phase somewhere. So you have any takes on how this thing all played out, Dan? What do you think is going to happen?
I think some of this is just people want to be upset because they romanticize this lawsuit. And in some cases, they don't necessarily know what's on the line, but they just want it to be a different game. And those people are never going to be happy. Like, as Taylor Swift says, haters are going to hate, right? So some people aren't just not going to be happy because they're on the other side of the ball, as if they're going to get that business otherwise. And honestly, you got to be able to play the game at that level if you're going to get that business. That means the next guy at the trough, if it's not them, it's AEG. It's possibly Outback. It's possibly Mammoth. It's possibly Nederlander. Who's big enough to play the game at that level? It's like, you can hate all you want, but then you make a comment about fan-friendly ticket prices. I don't think the concert promoters set the ticket prices. I think the managers, the agents, and the artists control the ticket prices. The promoters just decide if they're going to be in business with the band and step up to make that deal work.
I think that's an oversimplification of a system that honestly has run rampant on fee side of things, Dan, but I don't disagree with like the premise of what you're saying, that artists are in control of ticket pricing. I think there's a lot of factors that dictate how the artists think about those things, but you're not wrong about those things. To me, this is like Bernie Sanders, Luke Pierce over here thinking that the whole thing should be commoditized and that we are really just fundamentally not talking about the same set of standards, rules, negotiations with something as opaque as ticketing fees still in the mix on things. And so I'd love to see it all commoditized and regulated and all those things, but that's simply not going to happen in an American capitalist system. That's something for Europe to maybe deal with in this end of things. And certainly not going to be this Justice Department that does anything about it to assuage the consumer advocates, fan advocates, the people that are clamoring for deeper settlement, more change, all that stuff in this lawsuit. So I'm not holding my breath for this to be done anytime in the next certainly 2-3 years until there's something changed about this. But it does raise questions. It raises the standard of conversation about some of this stuff in America, and hopefully educates people about really what is going on in the music business right now.
Look, at the end of the day, if you want to compete, you have to evolve, and it's an evolve or die business. And if you want to get the business, you have to have a better mousetrap. And if you want the business at that level, you need to be funded and you need to build a mousetrap that's better than the next guys. And that's the true in any business. It's just what it takes. You need to have a paradigm shift if you're going to play the game at a higher level and you're going to pull business away from the top level. You just need to be better at it. You need to service better, deliver better, and be funded better. And honestly, it's hard to do that in this space because you're talking about needing such a level of funding that there's only 5 or 6 players that can truly do a full global tour at that level. Because it's not the promoters that decide you have to be playing for one promoter. It's the managers and the agents that are confirming these deals. If you turn down the tour deals and sell the shows locally, all the locals can get a taste. It's possible the best deal will get in every market. It's doable. There's a reason they're not doing that.
No doubt.
What else we got, Luke?
Well, while live music fights regulators, recorded music just keeps growing, Dan. I love getting this report every year. The International Federation of Phonographic Industry, that's the IFPI, they have their global recorded music revenues report where they break down what happened in the world of streaming across the entire globe in 2025. Comes out every year, every spring. Last year, global recorded music revenue hit $31.7 billion, a 7% increase year over year. That's 11 straight years of growth. Streaming, of course, still dominating things. Over $22 billion had in streaming revenue in 2025, which accounted for a little bit more than 70% of the total industry income. Today, nearly 850 million people are paid subscribers of a streaming service system. Astonishing considering that was not something that was even in advent in 2012. Some nuances that I think are interesting, Dan. Maybe this applies to our friend Rick Farrell, but physical's back. Finals up 13 or 14%. Physical was up overall last year, 8%. That's 19 straight years of vinyl growth and a couple of years of physical growth, which every time I see a CD at a merchandise stand, I sort of chuckle at it. I don't think that's nostalgia, that's margin. Geographically, we're seeing some shifts as well, too. Latin America is still a place that's growing, driven by huge demand and huge growth, up nearly 20%, 17% on the year. Africa and EMEA countries around 15%. North America has finally kind of hit a saturation peak. It's slowing down here, but it still accounts for nearly 40% of global revenues. Big section on IFPI that I thought was interesting. Everybody's talking about it. AI. It's calling out for a line in the sand, need for licensing on data training. Companies like Suno figuring out which libraries are actually training on what type of music or what type of copyright. The protection against deepfakes and cracking down on streaming fraud. The latter of which problem I don't think is as big as the former two together, but they had a great section kind of breaking down the future of AI and the impacts it'll have on the global recorded music business. The recorded side of the business needs to be stable, global, and scaling. And I think that's certainly validated by the entrance of institutional funds making investments into this space on the right side of things. And if you're a manager, investor, operator, that means that catalog is still a core asset class. It's not like no longer like an alternative asset class that people buy into. It's predictable and codified. I also think it complements the touring side of things, where global touring strategies matter more than ever. This is a global business in the record side of things, so you got to support on the live side of things. And super fans, that's people buying vinyl, people buying deluxe, all the D2C business are driving that incremental upside. So don't forget about servicing those fans to the best of your ability. Live music's fighting for control. Recorded music is compounding quietly in the background. Makes for a decent time in the music business these days, Dan.
Love the 11 straight years of growth. Feels like a solid place to be. People will continue to listen to the music far into the future, it sounds like.
No doubt. Keep paying that $9.99 a month, Spotify fans.
Dude, I love Spotify. Best thing since Napster.
Yeah.
That's right. Napster reference right here on Promoter 101.
That was good.
Let's face it, work is overrated. Conference room. Tune in to Steiny and Luke and pretend you're productive together.
It, of course, is not Promoter 101 without seeing what Dan has been up to over on X. You got some thoughts, Dan? You want to talk about them?
Talk about your media post from the last month as a catch-up from the last episode.
You know, I was really proud to share the news that my nephew, Cooper Nord, made second team All-Ivy as the lead scorer in the Ivy League this year. But aside from that, it was a slow news month for me, Dan.
All right, well, I guess I'm glad I tweeted a little bit then.
Yeah, I am too, Dan. You had a few good ones. Should we talk about them?
We're here. No time like the present, good sir.
All right. The over-ask on a favor has become so common.
I guess some people just like hearing no.
How about this? Ooh, when you have routed the perfect tour, cleared every hold, only to have the manager ask you to shift the whole thing a week.
And that just kills. And it happens so often.
Everyone is someone's butt dial. What do you mean by this, Dan?
For me, it's my dad and Bruce Solar. Just pick up the phone, you see the caller ID, and you just, the odds are you're going to hear the back of the conversation they're having with a waiter because they randomly just hit you.
I'm not at all surprised. That'll do it for Tweets of the Month. Make sure you follow Dan for some more gems. He's at the Jew on X.
Your excuse to turn up the volume and drown out Karen from accounting. Steiny and Luke in the morning on Promoter 101.
Dan and Connor and I are so lucky to have some amazing listeners out there. And I think one of the more rewarding parts of being a part of Promoter 101 is impacting the next generation of young talent coming into our business. Very recently, we had an email come in from a listener who was looking for a summer internship, and Dan offered her a spot here to kind of talk about this. I think what's very cool about this upcoming segment is just the passion that the young generation is bringing forward to try to get into our business. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome a special segment here with the University of Chicago college student Anna Lilly, who's looking for a summer internship this year in the music business.
So we've got a special feature. It's called Let's Get an Intern, a Summer Gig. So here's what's happened. We have the Promoter 101 email address, and some of you reach out with different questions, topics, ideas, concerns. University of Chicago student Anna Lilly reached out to me last week and said, I need help finding an internship in the music industry. Any ideas? And I said, maybe any of our listeners might be interested. Why don't you come on the podcast and tell us about yourself? And we can see if we can hook you up with a gig. So she was down, and here we are. Welcome to the podcast, University of Chicago student Anna Lilly. Hi, Anna.
Hi, it's nice to see you.
What year are you in school?
I'm a second-year undergraduate student.
Okay, so you're sophomore.
Yeah, sophomore.
So this will be between your sophomore and junior year. You're looking for industry work. Anything in particular that you're hoping to do as far as a field in the industry?
Yeah, so currently I'm majoring in business economics, data science, and entrepreneurship. But it is my main goal to apply my knowledge that I have at the university to the music business industry as a whole. Some directions I'd be interested in pursuing include artist relations, artist management, talent scouting, talent buying, and publishing. I've had 2 internships in the past, but I'm really just always looking for new ways to expand my knowledge into different facets of the music industry. And yeah.
Okay, so you've got an economics background. You're working in Chicago. Is your hope to stay in the Midwest area this summer? Or are you hoping to get out of the Midwest and be somewhere else in the country for the summer?
I'm completely open to being in other places in the country. Thankfully, my university give me a grant, and that grant money will be used to cover my living expenses for wherever my internship may be.
Okay. So you're able to travel. You're looking to work summer. What is the break between, I guess, going into summer and then back before fall starts again? When do you get out? When are you available? What's that window?
I start summer on June 8th, and summer ends September 28th. And so there's a good chunk of time.
What's your dream gig?
I would say my current career goal is to be a board member of the Golden Voice team when it comes to finding talent for the Coachella Music Festival.
Biggest brand in the festival space in America? Not a bad place to be. Programming legendary, iconic festival brands. What other things interest you in the workspace?
So my past internship I had at a music publishing company called PAQ, Pack Publishing. And I really got a lot of insight from that internship. I learned how to coordinate with performance rights organizations. Also, I got insight into how a music publishing company manages their talent. And I found all of that to be very eye-opening and interesting as well.
Okay. You like the idea of talent buying, economics, so financial stuff, accounting, what have you, marketing, any of the other aspects in the business, production, does any of that stuff interest you?
I'm certainly open to learning about marketing. When it comes to the production side, I'm not necessarily sure my passion lies there. I am very much interested in the business aspect of the industry and including management.
Okay. So there you have it. Anna's available this summer for an internship. Finishing her sophomore year, going into her junior year. She's looking for something in either the programming side of things or the financial side of things. If you're interested at all, Anna's email address will be left in the notes for the podcast. You can reach out to her directly. Anna, thank you so much for joining us on Promoter 101. Hopefully we hook you up with a great internship this summer, and one of our many listeners offer you many, many opportunities that you just get to choose from.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really enjoyed talking with you.
If you'd like to reach out to Anna directly, her email is annamusic2026@gmail.com. That's ANNA music2026@gmail.com. Link in the show notes.
It's pretty obvious they never really grew up. They only learned how to act in public. Steiny and Luke in the morning on Promoter 101.
Very excited about this month's featured interview. In a moment, we're going to be joined by Killian and Company's founder, Joe Killian. The band's had a long history in sponsorship, big part of the industry at a simply next level. So please welcome to the podcast, Joe Killian.
Promoter 101, we have a very special interview today with Joe Killian. Before we get too deep into it, this is a particularly special interview because it's one where Bill Silva did some matchmaking and said, you guys should know each other. And we happened to be at the Sunset Marquee in passing, and Bill was like, you guys know each other, right? You guys should know each other. And Bill is something of a great matchmaker in the industry, and he really has been great at knowing who's going to really click. So you never really shine off Bill when he says that. And that's what's great about the Sunset Marquee is you have those moments where you bump into a Bill Silva or a Joe Killian or any number of film or rock stars because people just act as if, and they don't bother people there. If you don't know somebody, you may shake their hand, but you don't bother them. People act as if. So because of the Sunset Marquee, because of Bill Silva, Killian and Company's Joe Killian was introduced to me, and we had a great conversation that led to a, would you please do the podcast because this is a great story, and you were nice enough to oblige. So thank you, Joe, for being here, and thank you for Bill Silva for bringing us together.
Many thanks to Bill Silva. I'm happy to be here. Say on the Sunset Marquee, you've given them a good promotion, but I'd say I was there several weeks ago, and I had an early flight back to New York, so I think I was there just when they opened for breakfast at 6 a.m. Big restaurant, kind of outdoors, so it was kind of a cool morning, and they had the overhead heaters on, as they do in Los Angeles, and they sit a guy right next to me, which is kind of unusual because you got a big restaurant. Why did they seat this guy? Oh, not at my table, but right next to me. And it obviously was because they had that heater on and it was blasting heat. I ordered breakfast and all that. And then the gentleman called somebody over to turn down the heater. I said, getting too hot, and he looked at me. He said something to the effect of, yeah, I was getting a burn from that. And I recognized that it was Alice Cooper. I grew up in Detroit. I was 17 when the song 18 came out. That song in Detroit was massive. I mean, obviously it was a big, big hit, but because he had moved back to Detroit to form his band, it was even that much bigger. So it was a good moment to meet him many years later. I've certainly been to a lot of his shows, but had not actually met him. So the Sunset Marquee did a little matchmaking surreptitiously almost, I loved meeting songwriters, singer-songwriters, people who have had songs that touch you deeply and emotionally. And obviously Alice is from my generation, I guess I'd say, but his songs still resonate. So that's the Sunset Marquee story from the last few weeks I got.
The restaurant, if you haven't been there, it's like eating in the album cover of No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom. It very much gives you that California paradise where you're in the Garden of Eden vibe, where there's a koi pond and it's just surrounded by the villas and just kind of perfectly placed on the other side of the pool. But it lends itself to this vibe of very social, very open to popping from table to table and saying hi to people at the same time, people watching, and yet your conversations are still somehow private at the table. You're not really over listening. So it's got a very unique setup. I think what the Chateau Marmont is for film, music certainly at the Sunset Marquee, and it's a very special one-off.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And, there are a few of those. You mentioned Chateau Marmont. I would say the Sunset Tower is similar. I guess on another echelon, if you go to the, Beverly Hills Hotel and the Polo Lounge, whatever, it's that's a different echelon of the ability to meet people and see people.
All things you can do on a budget, huh, Joe?
Yeah.
All right. Well, without further ado, the Sunset Marquee, we've given its due, and definitely thank you to Bill Silva. But let's talk about your history. Before we jump into some of the amazing things you've done in the business, let's talk about your education and what brought you to the business.
Good question. As I said, I grew up in Detroit. I started high school. I went to Catholic schools as a kid, and it was a local Catholic school, and the neighborhood was filled with post-World War II GIs, little houses that had been built for GIs, and all of them, I don't think of let's call it 25 homes on either side of the street. Maybe one person had gone to college. So in large, most of the parents they did sheetrock, they laid brick, they sold things, they were in service businesses, landscapers, things like that. And obviously that's true in Detroit and Chicago. I mean, these were on my particular block, just like everywhere else, these were people who had come from Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama. In the case of my parents, they came from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, the coal mines, because all of the jobs were there starting in 1950. And obviously, after the Second World War, Europe and Japan and much of the world was financially wrecked and physically in ruin. And America ruled the world. And the economy was ruled for that window of time by Detroit and the automobiles and everything else. I mean, I remember in our house, people laugh, we had a refrigerator that was made by General Motors. The car companies made all kinds of products. If it had any kind of an engine, could be a washer, could be a dryer, could be a refrigerator. There was an auto company making it. At any rate, I say all that because
Was that all three of the big three?
Oh, yeah.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah. Now, they often put it under different brand names, things like that, but very common. So I was fortunate, unfortunate circumstances. My father died when I was 10 years old, a real tragedy, a real trauma. My mother had never worked. She didn't have a driver's license. So all of a sudden, in a period of a couple of months, she got a job, got a driver's license, and our whole lives changed. But one of the things changed for me a couple of years later is my mom was convinced that education would help us. So went to an all-boys Jesuit high school. Now, this was 1969, and Detroit had, we had a successful baseball team and won the World Series, but we had also had the riots of 1967 that divided the city and made it a different kind of city. And I think what was rich about that for me is when I went to high school, and this we'll get to promoting and we'll get to entertainment, is it was a high school of all boys, but they came from around the city. They weren't just from my local neighborhood. I met guys, one guy who was a friend of mine, his dad was the mayor, and another guy was the lawyer for the city and all this kind of stuff. I had never knew about that kind of thing. But more than anything, I started learning a lot about music. My sister, who was 7 years older than me, had great taste in music, all the Beatles stuff, of course, but I remember specifically Nashville Skyline by Dylan. I remember her bringing home the book Beautiful Loser by Leonard Cohen, which obviously Bob Seger would turn into a song later. At any rate, it's 1969. I'm a kid, and we are holding dances in our high school. Sock hops, if you will.
Wilkes-Barre stuff.
No. This is Detroit. My parents were in Wilkes-Barre. I was born in Detroit. They had moved to Detroit 1950, I guess.
Okay, so your parents came from Wilkes-Barre
Correct.
to Detroit. So your roots are in Detroit. That's where it all came from.
Correct. In that window, we threw dances. Now, most of the schools around us would throw dances with a DJ of some kind, and our school threw live music dances. This was kind of before there was any kind of circuit, and bands were more regional. And because they were regional, and artists like Bob Seger, the MC5, other local acts, the Rationals, SRC, they had regional hits that they put out, and they would play like the Grandy Ballroom or other ballrooms regionally between Detroit, Chicago, Toledo, Cleveland. But then they had to fill in a lot of dates, and they'd fill them in by playing high schools because high schools didn't advertise except inside of themselves. So it was almost like a private show. And I say all that because it wasn't called a concert committee. I don't even know if we had a name, but we put on 5-6 dances a year, and we'd hire the MC5 or we'd hire Bob Seger and John Lee Hooker. It gave me a real taste of music and the fun of music and the passion of music. Now, in Detroit at that time, of course, you had a big jazz scene. You did have Motown, and everybody was proud of Motown, but the Motown top artists rarely played in Detroit, though the side musicians always played in clubs and bars and things like that. But you had a great music scene, a great country music scene because the people who had emigrated from the South brought that with them. So it was a real mixing place of blues, jazz, and a certain punk aesthetic, I'd say. Iggy and the Stooges were big, and obviously the MC5 created a sound that to this day is probably proto-punk or pre-punk. And Seger was always writing great ballads, So that gave me a real taste for it. I went off to college, tried a bunch of Michigan colleges, University of Michigan, Grand Valley, Oakland, eventually graduated, was dating a woman who wanted to be a dancer. So in 1979, we moved to New York City out of college.
You finished college where? You just named a bunch of schools in a bunch of cities.
University of Michigan.
Okay.
I think my high school education was incredible. I think my college education, I had a lot of other interests, and they were interests of that time. Most young men opposed the Vietnam War, opposed the Nixon administration, and I had a lot of extracurricular interests outside of school. So,
what year would have you moved to New York and graduated?
Well, I would have graduated 78, but I moved to New York in 1979.
Okay.
Came to New York, quite frankly, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Again, my girlfriend at the time wanted to be a dancer, and so she was taking classes and on that path.
You say dancer, I assume you mean like Broadway shows?
No, modern dance, like Trish Brown and some of the dancers who would eventually work with Robert Wilson and other kind of avant-garde artists like that. At the time, and maybe still, we refer to them as downtown artists. Musically, it would be the Philip Glasses of the world, people like that. But for me personally, I was kind of trying to figure out, what do I do next, or next meaning post-college. Well, what kind of life do I build?
Like every college kid in the world, right? You finish school, now you got to get a job and pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I did not have a parent or an uncle or somebody like that who could give me guidance. I had an incredibly loving mother, but she just wasn't connected, So I did a number of just the beauty of New York at that time was you could find labor, like building sets and things like that, stagehand work, especially in the downtown off-Broadway theaters. I say off-Broadway, off-Broadway theaters and things like that. And I continued to just city music because New York at that time, everybody toured. There were a ton of clubs, and I loved going to the clubs and seeing live music. There was nothing like live music that I saw that was fun, affordable, engaging, and in a certain sense, smart, and I was taken by that part of the city. I mean, clubs still exist in New York. I don't think in quite the same way. There were so many at the time. Many came and went. People obviously talk about CBGBs, but the Village Gate was an important venue for a lot of artists. The Bottom Line was an incredibly important space. There was a place called The Chance. There were all kinds of clubs. So it was quite a fertile scene. But I'm going to kind of jump forward a little bit to 1985. My friend who was the dancer had been working at the New York City Parks Department, and she was working in Brooklyn. And one day she said to me, you should check out the band shell in Central Park. You like music so much. You should look at that place. So I went there. It was beautiful. It was decrepit. It was falling down. Long story made short, I met with the Parks Commissioner, Henry Stern at the time, and a woman, Elizabeth Barlow Rogers, who had started a nonprofit to restore the landscape of the park, Betsy Barlow Rogers.
You're talking about Central Park itself, right?
Central Park, yep. The band shell is located right off 72nd Street in the middle of the park. And I created an idea called, which I named Summer Stage, Central Park Summer Stage, and convinced the commissioner and Betsy Barlow Rogers to allow me to do this. And, both said the same thing. Well, this is a great idea, but we don't have money, so you're going to have to go out and raise it. We raised a few bucks, but the Central Park Conservancy was also very helpful because they wanted to restore the park, and they knew the first thing to restore the park, they had to get people to come back to the park. And, this podcast will probably cover a lot of areas, but I don't need to go back in history. But I would say New York only 10 years prior had almost gone bankrupt. There's the famous line in the New York Post, the headline about the President Ford said, "Ford to city, drop dead." In the early 80s, I think it was 81 or 82, we had Bernie Goetz, who was the subway vigilante, shot a couple of young kids on a subway. 86, we had what was called the Preppy murder in Central Park. We had a Zodiac copycat killer in Central Park. And the police in 1986, NYPD, would not let me put on evening shows because they couldn't guarantee the security of people in the park. The safety, I should say.
Had to do matinees.
Had to do matinees, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Interesting convincing an artist to play at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. No lights, no nothing, The Central Park was unsafe. People did not go in the park.
Let me ask you really quickly. The buildings around Central Park for years have been some of the most desirable property to live in the country, in the world. Were they at that time too? Because the plaza's there and the Dakota and some of the greatest buildings in the world. Even at that time, while the park was unsafe, were those buildings still the hottest buildings in the world?
Yeah. I mean, it was
So it wasn't that the area wasn't desirable. It was the park was unsafe.
correct.
Okay.
I mean, you've got basically 900 acres between 67th Street and 105th, and it's a couple avenues wide. And the park was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted it's an artificial design, meaning he crafted roads so that you could only see 50, 75 feet ahead of you. So they weren't on the grid of New York City. He wanted you to be in a bucolic kind of hideaway outside of the city. So you didn't have to take a train 20 or 30 miles. You could just come to the park and enjoy the outdoors, which all is great, except in the 70s and 80s made it very, very unsafe. And an area that large is kind of unpoliceable, especially if it's full of trees, bushes, brambles, hidden places, rock outcroppings, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. But, I would say New York in general, at that time, we had a bunch of garbage strikes. Crime was much, much higher than it is now. And it was a dangerous city, 1970, very dangerous city into the 80s, That changed over time, but it took a good deal of time.
Your issue with the afternoon shows reminds me of the podcast we did with Peter Akins of his issues in Ireland, where they had to do afternoon shows because there were curfew issues, and it was the only time they could do shows because of the troubles they had. So it seems like there's a parallel, not only in times roughly, but because people couldn't and wouldn't go out at night because they weren't allowed.
Peter and I have had some good conversations about the similarities. I don't think here in the States we realize. I remember at Summer Stage I booked Richard Thompson, and we were talking about the danger of the city and all that. And he said, well, I do shows in Belfast all the time. And then he told me about, going into a hotel and how the security measures that would be taken, and the same thing, playing matinees, basically. So, yeah, similarities, I think. But I think I want to be also honest, the other side of it. It made New York a very fertile city, and obviously, whether it's Patti Smith television, the Ramones, Talking Heads, on and on and on, all of those bands were born of that era, of that moment. All of the beat poets who were still on the Lower East Side were important to that fertile place. I mentioned Philip Glass, the downtown avant-garde music scene, Robert Wilson creating new operas and things like that. It was a very fertile art scene. And it was, look, everything was affordable. When I moved to 10th and A with my girlfriend, I think we paid $200 for a fourth floor walk-up. I found a place down on Chambers Street, which is now, the fancy Tribeca neighborhood. That was a stretch because that was $300, but it was safe because nobody lived there. I lived on the ground floor of a retail setup. So New York was, for musicians, it was affordable. It made for an incredible not only music scene but art scene in terms of painters and others. So in 1985, I come up with the idea of Summer Stage, and then by the following June, we're doing shows. For the first 3 years, we did them all in the afternoon. We started doing some dance concerts in the evening, proved safe as long as people exited the way we wanted them to exit. And the band show was a special place, and we just featured a lot of different artists. As I mentioned, everything from, Sun Ra to Bo Diddley to Joseph Shabalala, so many West African musicians, all of it free. There were no paid shows at all. I should say that we had free shows and no commercial shows because Ron Delsner, who dear friend of mine, Ronnie had done shows at Woolman Rink prior. This would be in the mid-'70s. And Woolman Rink was, it had been an ice skating rink, and in the summer it was vacant, so Ronnie did shows in there. But every show was madness for security and sound and everything else. So the parks department basically kicked Ron out of the park.
Will you clarify what you mean by commercial show? When you said you didn't do commercial shows.
I didn't do paid shows.
Paid shows. Okay.
Now let's flash forward to 1990. We've had a lot of success. It's still a challenge, just like any other small business, maybe even more challenging because we're doing all the shows for free. Producing in New York is never easy. Even though these were not paid shows, we were getting a lot of artists from record labels. We were getting pop artists. And so, in some way.
On what sponsorship and concessions at that point and getting the artists for free?
Correct. Exactly. And donations and, that's what it was. But it was really, string in a can kind of technology that we did, and then after a couple of years, I saw that we really couldn't use the band shell much more. It was just too small and the audiences were getting too large. So I asked, and proposed that we move to what's called Rumsey Playfield. And it's a big playfield, clay surface behind the band shell. And we moved there. Once we moved there, we then brought in full stage, full production, dressing rooms, everything so that we could do professional shows. And I think it was the first year, Dave Fry was working for Delsner at the time. And Dave Fry said, hey, you got to meet Ronnie. And I said, yeah, I've met Ronnie. He said, yeah, but I think we could do shows in here and, generate some revenue for you guys. Oh, okay, right, okay. I think 2 weeks later, Dave left, but, I met with Ron and, Ron is a dear friend to this day. And he and I don't know, we have lunch every month together, but he was out of his mind. But he did have Melissa Miller at the time, who was booking his clubs. And she said, yeah, I'd love to put the Neville Brothers in there. I said, well, I love the Neville Brothers. That'd be great. I said, but, the parks had a bad taste of Ron Delsner before, so we got to be careful with this. And she said, okay. I said, so let's make it really a cheap ticket and make it fun. And that's what we did. And it was a $15 ticket. We sold out immediately. I think
What's your capacity at that point?
We sold at that point, I think we sold 6,500 tickets. Now it's lower because there's more dressing rooms and more backstage and more concessions and all that. But
One more $15 tickets, I'm guessing.
No. But we did a number of those over the next few years with Melissa and with Ron, but Melissa was the point person. And, we had Simply Red and Annie Lennox and a whole host of others. And then because we now had full production, David Byrne on his first non-Talking Heads tour when he had made the Ray Momo record on the 4th of July in the park, an extraordinary show. Sonic Youth and Sun Ra together on the 4th of July. I established a spoken word series, and we had Lou Reed and Patti Smith read from their works, along with Studs Terkel, John Sayles, Oscar Hijuelos, and a host of other really, really great writers. Many musicians, but many writers, We were doing 40 plus shows a year to big success. And it was I think it is one of the things that changed, contributed to how New York started to change, because we had people who wanted to come, have fun, respect the park, buy a beer, and then leave. And that caused trouble. And it was an important place for a lot of young musicians to open up for others. For me, it was a great opportunity because not only did I get to meet all the agents and managers and all of that, but also, again, people like Melissa Miller who were really buttoned up and, maybe a little bit unique because she would be the next generation after Ron. Not that Ron Well, Ron wasn't buttoned up at all. Never was. But she was very, very good, and a great marketer also. I think the one thing I would say that I've always loved artists collaborating with one another, and whether it's film, television, or live shows, I've tried to encourage that. And then at that time, and I still believe it, Summer Stage is going to celebrate its 40th anniversary this year. And I believe in what I'm going to call civic engagement by citizens. So I looked at things like Ralph Lee starting the Halloween parade here in New York. It didn't exist. He started in the West Village. It was very, very small. And now it's become hundreds of thousands of people and a legitimate parade. But Halloween has blown up since he started that in the late 70s. I looked at people like Barry Benepe, who had started the green markets here in New York. There were not green markets. You could not buy fresh fruit anywhere or fresh vegetables anywhere. And now I think the green markets 40-some years later have changed the cuisine of New Yorkers and the restaurants of New Yorkers. And I think free outdoor music was part of that too. But I learned from those people that you don't have to depend on your government, because I think depending on the government to do much is a bit hopeless. You got to do it yourself. So if you want to start a club, start a club. If you want to start a concert series, start that. If you believe people should eat fresh vegetables and you can get farmers to come to Union Square, a dangerous place at the time, great. And then take it over, and all of a sudden Union Square after 5 or 10 years is an incredible location. The same with the Halloween parade, the same with all of so many venues like that. I'd say do it yourself, create it yourself.
Certainly a business with an independent spirit, so it makes sense. How did the Radio City come into the picture from your Central Park days?
Okay, so at Radio City at the time, Scott Sanders headed up the entertainment team. Eddie Micone was his number 2.
Fast Eddie.
Yes, Fast Eddie. And Eddie is still a dear friend of mine. But importantly, Radio City at the time was not owned by MSG. It was owned by the Rockefeller family. At that point, the Rockefeller family had sold off most of Rockefeller Center to Mitsubishi, but the family held on to Radio City. And I think Scott rightly saw that the Christmas show was the big success, and it took up with load-in, let's call it from October 15th through January 15th, in terms of load-in, load-out. And then
that's the Rockettes, right? When you say the Christmas show?
Yeah, it's called the Christmas Spectacular, the Rockettes and all that. Hugely successful. I mean, at that time, we sold over 1 million tickets a year, and it's even more now because they've added shoulder season dates. So there were only so many dates available.
What does shoulder season mean?
Earlier in October and later in January.
Okay.
So
never heard that.
Well, you look at, New York has a huge Latino population, and much of it is Christian, much of it Catholic. A lot of times their celebration, their kind of Christmas thing extends into January, right? I think it's called the Three Kings or something, because the Three Kings didn't show up on Christmas Day or something. And forgive me, I don't mean to offend anyone, but there's another 2 weeks there. So Radio City extends the show well into January, and they do many of the productions in Spanish. And then they start earlier in October now. And what I'm calling the shoulder season, it's the same show. It's a great show. You're well before the Christmas season, but you're also getting a ticket that's probably half the price or a third of the price as opposed to, Thanksgiving time, when you're at...
So you're off peak.
Off peak. Thank you. That's a better way to say it. Off peak. At any rate, Scotty rightly wanted to start to promote in other venues, Roseland at the time and others. So Eddie Micone sourced Jim Glancy from Wolf Trap and myself from Summer Stage. And Jimmy and I, we book shows in Radio City, of course, but we also book shows all around the city. And that could be Madison Square Garden. It could be, again, Roseland. It could be any one of a number of clubs.
So were you competing with Delta Slater at the time then?
Yeah. We went head to head with Delser Slater.
And I assume Metropolitan too, then.
And Metropolitan, and anybody else like Julie Loken or all the other ones. But Ron and John Scher were the big ones, and of course, Mitch Mitch was a fierce competitor, and I respect that. As was Ron, but Mitch was especially fierce. And
those are three guys that don't just let shows go.
No, and New York. I was always amazed when we'd go to L.A. and there were all these promoters in L.A. and somehow I couldn't. They got along or something. I don't know. In New York, promoters just fought, and it was not pretty. It was everybody had accepted the kind of Frank Barcelona franchise system, but it was really, really brutal. And I mean, for every show, I did a show at Town Hall with Daniel Lanois, and it was, I think, on. Daniel obviously had been producing U2 and other records, but I think this was his first record on his own. And I don't know if you know Town Hall, but it's a small 1,500-seat venue, and it was built as I think in the 1920s, as a place where people would give speeches, not performances, but they would give a talk on whatever they were talking about, a topic. So the stage is very small. Historically, you would put the speakers, you couldn't fly them. You put them on the floor, stage left or stage right. And that's what everybody did. Ron Delser, John Scher, myself, everybody did that, right? So you put a big stack on the floor, stack it up, and about 20 minutes before showtime, it's a sellout show, and we've got probably 3/4 of the audience in there. The fire department shows up. They basically delay the show. We had to move the stacks of speakers, and the show did go on. It was delayed 40 minutes. We had to empty the theater. Everybody else had to go back in. But let me just say this. That happened because somebody gave them a call, and somebody paid them some money and said, you got to go disrupt this show, And that's how New York played. And it was a competitive message. That's just New York, It's a tough town, always has been, And I'd say there's nothing as good as competition to make you better, to learn more, act quicker. And I think all of those early promoters, not only were they entrepreneurs and not only were they savvy business people, but very creative. And I think competition forces creativity. And the example I'd use is I give credit to Scott Sanders, but Eddie worked on it. I worked on it. Jim Glancy worked on it. It was all of us. But Scott had the relationship. I'd say at Radio City, I'm making this up. I'm going to say we did the first residency. I don't know if that's true or not. But we got Bette Midler to commit to 15 shows, and we went to 30 shows at Radio City. So if Radio City's 5,400, 30 shows, you could do the math. It was extraordinary. Run of 30 shows. And so I don't think that would have come about if we hadn't been punched in the nose on some of the other shows we were trying to get,
It's 162,000 tickets, by the way.
There you go. Okay. Thank you. And Bette had not performed live, I'm going to say in a decade. I could be wrong, but she had her film career, and she was, a huge film artist. Scott, through his tenacity, convinced her to sit down at Radio City. Now, she lived in New York, so that was attractive to her, but she mounted a whole show, and it was extraordinary. And we did 30. We could have done 50 or 60 or 70, but we ran into the Christmas show date, so we couldn't add any more than the 30. So I'd say that competition, especially the fierce competition of Ron Delser, Mitch Slater, John Scher, it forced us to be that much more creative.
Now, would you still rent to them while you're competing with them? Would you rent the venues to them?
Would we rent venues?
Yeah, while we were competing with them for shows, were you allowing them to come into your room?
Okay, that's a good question, because prior to my arrival, when Scott got there, which I don't know the year Scotty arrived, because I'm talking about the years 93, 4, 5, 6. I don't know what year Scotty arrived. I should check it out. I'm going to say 90. Prior to that, Radio City had been an open room. Anybody could rent it. When Scott came in and he was given this kind of new remit, he decided to make it a closed room and only Radio City could promote. Pretty fierce of no co-promote. So I'll give you an example of one really tough one. You know, the Allmans had always played March Madness at the Beacon forever and ever and ever. And we were able to convince them to come do 5 or 6 shows at, I think it was 5 at Radio City. And I think that was 94 or 5. And that was like a bomb went off in the Delsner Slater office, you know, and they were throwing bombs at us. The Allmans only did it the 1 year, and then they went back to the Beacon. But Johnny Podell was their agent, and Johnny convinced them that, yeah, you can keep doing the Beacon. You can always come back to the Beacon, but let's mix it up and play the palatial Radio City. So they did, and they loved it, and it was a great run of shows. The same, I think we did 3 or 4 shows with Prince, the same with Lenny Kravitz. So we were winning big shows, and needless to say, that didn't go over because it wasn't that many years prior when the room was open and could be rented to Delsner or Cher or whomever.
It's an interesting decision to decide to lock promoters out, even on the co-promotes, when history was involved, especially when history was so adamantly looked after at that point of the history and of the business.
You know, I was not involved in that decision, but I would agree with you. To me, you know, I think I share Bill Silva's point of view. Hey, let's collaborate, let's co-promote. But I have to say, maybe it was the time, but maybe it was also New York. You didn't do much of that. And, you know, I know that agents tried to have us consider it, but it was just, you know, they didn't want to do it. Everybody lived through it, and now it's a different day and a different owner.
Well, and speaking of a different day, let's jump ahead to your relationship with American Express and how that came about.
So after being at Radio City, I had gotten to know George Wein, and George, kind of the father of all festivals. He started the Newport Jazz Festival in the early 50s. He started the Newport Folk Festival in the mid-50s, and then in the late 60s, early 70s, started the New Orleans Heritage and Jazz Festival. George was a savvy marketing guy in addition to being a jazz lover, and in addition to being a civil rights advocate, and in addition to being just a passionate lover of jazz and folk music. But George also knew from his experience that this could be of interest to brands. And so the two of us said, let's work on a company that is built for brands. George, when he started Newport Jazz, started it because the Lorillard family invited him there. George had a club in Boston called Storyville, and the Lorillard family said, hey, why don't you come down to Newport and do a jazz festival? And George went to Newport and visited and said, whoa, this is fantastic. And the Lorillard family, which was tobacco money, they subsidized it, I think, for 30 years. At any rate, George and I started this with a partner, Laura Laughlin. We quickly got Guinness as a client, and it was, at the time, wasn't owned by Diageo, though it got sold to Diageo quickly. And it was called the Guinness Import Company. And we built festivals over a period of 4 years called the Guinness Fleadh. And the Fleadh is a Gaelic word for festival. And we did them in Randall's Island, Suffolk Downs in Boston, Arlington Racetrack in Chicago, because at the time we couldn't get Grant Park. And then San Jose State was the first year, and then the second year we were able to get Golden Gate Park. But ostensibly they were Irish festivals, but really they were singer-songwriter festivals. So yeah, we had Van Morrison as a headliner, but we also had Elvis Costello, we had Shane MacGowan and the Pogues, we had Bonnie Raitt, we had Lucinda Williams, we had Wilco, Squeeze, Well, I mentioned Richard Thompson earlier. I mentioned John Lee Hooker earlier. So these were multi-stage festivals, 50,000 people a day. I wouldn't say a forerunner to the other ones that now go on, but we took a partner in, Vince Power from London, and Vince had the main fiddler in the UK, and Vince had produced the Reading Festival and the Phoenix Festival, so he was very, very familiar with festivals and what it would take to build a festival and a touring festival, because obviously he had built many, many of them as part of Mean Fiddler in the UK.
Were these multiple day festivals in each city?
No. Well, yes. I said no, but I mean yes. They were 2-day festivals, but there was no camping or anything, you know. They were 2-day festivals, and they started at noon and they ended around midnight. There was traditional Gaelic dancing. There were competitions, but it was a mix of music was the whole thing. And obviously there was a lot of Guinness poured. I think we set the record, the 1-day pour record back then was we poured 100,000 pints in 1 day, which that's a lot of beer to pour in a day, especially because Guinness takes time to pour.
Yeah, it's slow. Yeah, it's the slower pour.
And you got a discerning taster in the fan. The fan wants that poured perfectly. We'll get to Amex, but the big lesson I learned that day was something I didn't think would work. The Guinness company wanted to have an area where you could pour your own pint, and you would pull the thing and you'd pour your own pint. And I thought, well, that sounds like a good promotion, but why would anybody pay for that when they can go and get a bartender to pour it perfectly and go? And the Guinness people were very polite and diplomatic, and they said, you just don't understand our brand. And I thought, well, hey, I'm Irish American. I love Guinness. I understand your brand, but I really didn't. Passion people have for being able to pull that pint themselves is huge. So we had lines of people just waiting to pull their own pint and pay to pull it, So it was a good lesson in marketing. At the same time, George had a relationship with Ken Chenault. Ken Chenault at the time headed marketing at American Express. Ken would later go on to be the CEO and chairman for 20 years, but at the time he headed up marketing. Amex had launched a product called Gold Card, and they needed something that was a plus. What set this card differently? So we created something called Gold Card Events, and it was only on Broadway, and you had to call an 800 number for Ticketmaster in general, but telecharge also. There was no internet, and you'd call an 800 number and you'd use your card and you'd buy a ticket to a Broadway show. We had at any given time 7, 8, 10 shows out of, let's call it 20. So we probably had half of the Broadway shows running using Gold Card Events. I saw that what the producers on Broadway wanted was a full page ad, because that cost $110,000. This is back in the 90s, right? But that's what they wanted. And if they could save that money and get Amex to buy it, they were happy with it. And they didn't care how many tickets got sold to Amex or not. They were happy with it because the Amex Gold Card member was similar to their Broadway goer. I wanted to expand.
Plus, they're paying for the tickets anyway.
They're going to
buy the ticket. It's a win.
There's no discount. It's a win. It's a win. I saw that we could do this in the music space, and it wouldn't have to be New York only. And so Carl Freed, who was working for John Scher at the time, had 3 shows with The Who coming to Madison Square Garden. And
this is the rock and roll DJ Carl Freed, right?
No. That's Alan Freed.
Alan Freed.
Carl Freed. Carl worked for John. He had, before that, he had worked for Ron. He had also headed up the Promoters Association. He lives in L.A. now. At any rate, Carl said, I got these 3 shows, and I've been talking to Carl. I've been talking to Ron. I've been talking to me. I talked to anybody, How can we grow this? And they said, well, look, we'll try it out on The Who, but you got to buy a full-page ad in the New York Times, and you got to buy some radio. Okay, we did that. I think we sold out 2 of the 3 shows to Amex card members. It wasn't only Gold Card, though. It was green, whatever card you had, Again, no internet. This is all calling an 800 number. So everybody was ecstatic over that. And the next step after that, Ken had risen up the ranks. He was now CEO. He hired a guy, John Hayes, to be the chief marketing officer. And he said to John, we need more things like this. And John was a strong advertising guy, but he saw the value in this. Now, this is long before people talked about an experiential economy or anything like that, but I knew we had cracked the code. And I knew the next step was doing larger deals, creating a national footprint. So I did a deal with Delsner for the shows at Jones Beach and, at the time it was called Garden State Art Center. Now it's PNC Bank. But, Jones Beach and Garden State. I did a deal with Bill Silva. And I'd say Bill Silva's probably the longest running deal American Express has had because I didn't know the LA market well enough. I knew that there were multiple promoters. This is before Crypto Arena, before AEG and all that. And I didn't know how to crack it, but I did know I had met Bill when he was in San Diego and I was at Radio City on a show that Radio City was promoting. I liked Bill a lot. I knew that I could trust Bill, and he had the Hollywood Bowl deal. And I thought, okay, it's a beautiful facility. We'll get, at the time, I think it was 12 or 15 shows, something like that. So we had Delsner, we had Bill Silva, and then I filled in some with Jam and, some of the other markets.
Chicago, New York, and LA.
Yeah. It started to roll and become a success. Now, we do this for a couple of years, and it's becoming a big, big success. Internet is starting, but still not that significant. Ticketing is still, you had Bass Tickets in San Francisco. Fred Rosen was rolling up all the Ticketmaster companies, but you still had a lot of, even though.
But these are the first presets.
Oh, yeah, first ever. Yeah. And
the invention of the presale.
Yes. But I'm saying one of the challenges was you had all these companies that had the Ticketmaster name and logo, but they had all different systems because they had all grown up out of regional ticketing companies, again, like Bass. And then Fred kind of rolled them up, but they all had their own system. It wasn't like it is today.
Integrated.
So these were the first pre-sales, big marketing success. So successful that, another company that was owned by the holding company, the Interpublic Group of Companies, a company called Momentum, was rolling up event agencies, marketing companies, things like that. So George and Laura and I agreed to be acquired by them in the year. Well, they came to us in 2000. We didn't finalize the deal till 2001, and we became part of Momentum. I'd say once we became part of Momentum, it helped us a lot because we were just able to really connect the dots with a lot of promoters. And there was also some shifts in the marketplace, particularly in New York. Jim Glancy, who had been at Radio City, went to work for Delsner. Delsner had been bought by Sillerman at that point. I don't think anybody else had been bought by Sillerman, but it was still Delsner Slater. But
it was the early days of SFX.
Yeah.
Began Clear Channel Concerts, eventually Light Nation.
Well, I don't even think the SFX name was there yet. And Mitch went to work with Bob Sillerman closely. Ron brought Jim Glancy over to take Mitch's role. And I say that because Jim and I were very close friends, and I had attended his wedding and on and on and on. He understood the power of this. So I'm going to say this was 2002. We put all of the Jones, at the time, Jones Beach and Garden State, they'd run a big ad and all 30 shows would go on sale on the same day, right?
This is when print ads still mattered.
Correct. And they were all like little postage stamps, and you had 30 shows. They'd all go on sale on the same day. And so I think we gave Amex card members a 2-day or a 3-day jump on a pre-sale like that. And huge success, though, controversial because nobody had ever done it at that scale. When it was a one-off kind of 3 shows with The Who or this or that, everybody kind of like, okay. But now when it's like 30 shows, there was a lot of controversy. I'm grateful to Jim Glancy that he stood by us, and it was a big success. And obviously at that point, that program.
We should also point out while you're talking about that, back in the 80s and early 90s and 70s, concert seasons for summer concerts. Concerts didn't necessarily go all year round. Some bands toured in the winter, but very few. But for the most part, summer concert season was the big part. And they would announce the summer season, for the most part, in one big shot. And that was a huge day in every city, was concert announcement day in all the major cities. So this was that day, and this was that thing. It wasn't like now when shows just announce tours nationally whenever they want.
I've forgotten so much, but you're 100% right, because it was usually like May 1st. And then the first concert would be a couple weeks later, Memorial Day. So nobody went on sale 6 months, 8 months, a year in advance. And everybody waited for that day. And you'd have print, but you'd also have radio hyping it for 10 days. And yes, most of the big concerts were in the amphitheaters. And it was an era where the amphitheater was an attractive thing and the lawn was an attractive thing, because a lawn ticket was affordable. And people loved to go there, hang out, and do whatever they wanted to do with whoever they wanted to do it with. It was a place of great freedom. And the productions, needless to say, were not what they are today. So you didn't have to worry about hanging screens and gear and all that stuff. There were arena tours, but much less so, because the arenas were not built for concerts. And I think a lot of the arena owners, because they usually owned a team, whether a hockey team or a basketball team or both, they appreciated the revenue from concerts, but they also saw concerts as difficult, harder for their staff to work. Ticketing was an issue, all that kind of stuff. I think they saw concerts not as a nuisance, but in some markets, I think the fans just had a better experience at that time in amphitheaters. So the summer season was absolutely what everybody lived for. It was like school's out and let's go. So yeah, absolutely. Very different at that time.
So we haven't really talked about sponsorship a ton, but as I know, a lot of my listeners are always wanting to know what they can do to get their eyes peeled for the sponsors. What are the things that, from the sponsorship side, is the most attractive to them when being pitched?
Okay. So American Express has been a client of mine for, let's call it 28 years, but I've also worked with New Balance, Chanel, Verizon, a whole lot of other brands. And I think the first thing I would recommend to any artist is check out what the brand stands for. What are the brand values? What are the kind of audiences they're going for? Right now with American Express, the marketing dollars are really geared toward building awareness among the next generation of fans. So if you look at the last 2 years of deals, Billie Eilish, Dua Lipa, Olivia Rodrigo, Ed Sheeran, and obviously most recently Harry Styles. It's our third deal with Harry Styles. So you can see, okay, Amex is looking to get a younger, call it 18 to 30-year-old fan, to make them aware of the brand.
Because I already have an Amex and they know that?
Well, there are certain programs for all cards, but I think like every brand, you could be a beer brand, you could be a car brand. You want that next consumer. You want to keep your loyal fan, your loyal consumer, but you want to bring the next along. It's my opinion that the Amex card member, regardless of the card they have, they love entertainment, they love food, they love travel. I'd say, they're financially doing okay, but they don't have a lot of time. So they want the less friction that they can have, the better. I think they're the definition of super fans. Having said that, the programs that we've built, many are copied by competitors. And I would say if you're a manager, what's happened in the business, record labels and talent agencies, they never had what they have now. They've got teams of brand partnership people. These are people who are experts, in brand deals, and they've got, a contact list of 50 brands. If you're signed to UTA, WME, CAA, or the team, they have got large brand groups who do nothing but sell sponsorships. And I would say if you're a young artist, go to them and tell them what your dream is. Well, what kind of brands do you want to work with? Who do you not want to work with? Because, for instance, there are a lot of artists who work with competitors like Cash App because Cash App appeals to them for whatever reason it does. I think that Amex is a more premium, better brand. Most artists want to be associated with it. But the same is true in the auto category, the fragrance category. There's certain artists, Harry Styles, Billie Eilish, who have luxury brand deals like Gucci. We saw a couple of years ago with Kendrick when he did his Cash App deal with, he had Ray Diallo as part of his commercial. So I'd say identify, if you're a young artist, identify what you'll do, identify the kind of products you like, and then try and build something around that. I'd say the one thing we see more than ever before is artists creating their own products, In the case of Harry Styles, the line of Pleasing as a cosmetics brand. And I think artists want more and more new revenue streams because, you make it on touring, that's true. Less made on recorded. You can maybe, if you're good, you could act, but in many ways, I think you got to create whatever your brand is and then attach a product to it. And it may be a product that you create that is unique to you. Having said that, I'd say music brands have, whether you're the Grateful Dead or the Eagles, these are brands. They're big brands. They have an identity. They have values. And if you say, what are the Grateful Dead values? You'll get a list of some. If you say, what are the Eagles values? You'll get another list. If you say Jack White, you get another list. So artists build brands, not always intentionally, but sometimes intentionally. And when you have that kind of super fan, that kind of loyalty, that kind of relationship with community of fans, if there is a brand that you trust and you believe in those brand values, I'd say approach them. But make sure it's a good fit, Make sure it's not just a money grab because you can get tainted very easily by that. And fans are smart, and fans, just because you're associated with the brand, the fans are not necessarily going to go and buy it or sign up for it or anything like that. So build in protections for yourself and build in things that you can deliver on, meaning it could be a private show, it could be a meet and greet, could be a photo op, it could be simple things like that,
Well, I think fans are truly getting to see some of the more interesting crossovers right now, whether it's Reese's and Oreos coming together to do a collab, or it's the Grateful Dead, Nike, and the University of Oregon coming together for a special week at a football game with jerseys and paraphernalia. Like the fans finding this middle round where you've got some of your favorite things all coming together at once and meeting for a special event is next level, and it gives a fan a chance to engage. And when you nail it, you kind of hit it out of the park. So it's a new decade. It seems very fun for the fans and for the brands.
Well, you look at, again, what we did with American Express did with Harry Styles most recently. So there were the pre-sales, big success, of course. There was the one-night-only album launch in Manchester, but there were also 16 pop-ups around the world, from Tokyo to Los Angeles to New York to London to Manchester. Around the world, there were pop-up shops coinciding with the launch of the album. So a brand can give you that gas in the tank to do pop-ups in 16 markets. Having said that, I give all credit to Jeffrey and Tommy and the Full Stop team to direct, coordinate, and build that, because it's not just merch. If you went in there, there was a Harry Styles kitchen modeled after his actual kitchen. There was a greenhouse in there modeled after Harry's greenhouse with real tomatoes, So you get a little bit of I'm not going to call it immersive, but you get to experience the artist, and not just in a merch way, but in a broader way. We did pop-ups with Blackpink a couple of years ago, and Blackpink was playing Hyde Park. And we did this pop-up, and there were lines and lines of Blackpink fans. And I was talking to many of them because, why do you show up early for this and that, Obviously, for American Express card members, there's certain benefits, an early entry line and an exclusive product that they can buy. But many of these fans could not afford the ticket to go to the Hyde Park show, or the show had sold out and they didn't get a ticket. They just want to be part of the Blackpink community. And that might be buying a trading card for £2, or it might be buying a 30-pound hoodie or a t-shirt, or it might mean buying nothing and getting a photo op in front of the big Blackpink heart, right? So fans these days want to experience their artist in different ways, not only in a concert setting, but in a larger setting. And to the extent that the artist is willing to do that, I think, the sky's the limit of what you can create experientially and have a revenue stream associated with that, Part 2, we're going to talk about content and the Unstage series and some of the content things we're doing now, because artists creating content that touches their fans. I mean, artists have always done films and things like that, but I think that there are new ways of creating content, primarily short form on YouTube. Again, you can get insights into your favorite artist. Some of it will be, I did a documentary on Keith Richards with Morgan Neville, the director. It was called Under the Influence, and it was not about the Rolling Stones. It was about Keith and Keith's influences. So we followed the Stones, but only in the markets, because that's where Keith would be. So in Chicago, we took Keith to Muddy Waters' house and Buddy Guy's club, and Buddy and he played together, and the Opry House in Nashville and so on, to really explore his influences, particularly in blues and early country music. And I think for fans want that real deep insight. They don't want the glossy picture. They want to really know their artists, whether that's a legacy artist or a new artist. They want to get some insight into who they are. I'd say, the best example is probably Saturday Night Live last night, where Harry is on, and he's kind of making fun of himself about queer baiting. And I thought it was brilliantly done, really brilliantly done, because if you're a fan, you got some insights into who he is. And I think that's what fans want. So, but that's for part 2.
Joe, I got to tell you, one of the more fascinating interviews we've ever done, going from Detroit to Central Park Summer Stage, creating that series, to Radio City, to your work with American Express and sponsorships. I feel like we're just scratching the surface, and there's so much more there. I know you've got a full afternoon planned, but I want to thank you so much for making time and talking to us, because this has been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. I appreciate this. Take care.
They thought they wanted careers. Turns out they just wanted paychecks. Steiny and Luke in the morning on Promoter 101.
Quote of the month comes to us from Mandy Hale. Sometimes it takes a wrong turn to get you to the right place. Kind of deep, Luke.
Kind of deep. Roads are windy out there in life, and I'd agree with Mandy. I feel like sometimes getting lost is not exactly that.
Now, their opinions may have changed, but not the fact that they're always right. Steiny and Luke in the morning on Promoter 101.
Friends, thank you so much for tuning in today. Big thank you to our special guest, Joe Killian, and to Anna Lilly for joining us in this month's podcast. Thank you all to all of our listeners tuning in today. If you like what you heard, you want to stay in touch with us, our line's always open. Hit us at steiny@promoter101.net if you just miss us and you want to catch up.
Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you on the 30th of April, and as always, the last Thursday of every month moving forward.
Our April episode will feature legendary agent Johnny Padell.
Longtime agent to the Allman Brothers and many, many others. Johnny's got so many stories and kind of a fashion icon. Looking forward to this one.
And in the meantime, we are wishing you sold-out shows in months to come.
Cheers.
Call your mother.
Visit the buffet called Promoter 101.